Welcome. My name is Alexander, and this is the Egyptian Prophecy: The Fate of Ramses, a puzzle adventure game from 2004. Games about Egyptology are liable to the kind of pseudo-archaeology tropes I called out in Riddle of the Sphinx, so I was curious to see what we might get out of a game set in ancient Egypt rather than just about ancient Egypt. This is Kamwaset, and he was a real person, son of Ramses II. He's just setting the scene for us, though. We play as Maya, a magician and investigator sent by the pharaoh to root out the cause of the accidents and ill omens plaguing the preparations for a new obelisk at the temple of Amun-Ra. Prophecy says that King Ramses will die if it isn't raised on time. This game originally came to my attention because it was published by Microids, the same company that made Siberia. And clearly, Microids' brand appreciates having women player characters, just for the sake of it. It's not the least unreasonable, either. Egyptian women were a lot more public-facing and independent than the era would have you believe. Unlike Siberia, however, Fate of Ramses is first-person, with Maya only being seen in cutscenes. You click from place to place in the environments, and at each point you have a full range of vision. The environments in question are quite small, usually amounting to a few rooms and an outdoor space, but many of them are lavishly designed in terms of scenery, set dressing, sound, and inhabitants. Doesn't stop you from getting turned around sometimes, especially in the temple where the game starts. Then again, I can attest that it is actually pretty easy to get lost in those hypostyle halls.
Apostle Hall.
I definitely found myself running cursor search patterns for usable objects a lot too, although sometimes it isn't necessary. Walking past a usable object will sometimes trigger Maya to look down and note it, which, for better or worse, does cut down on the effort you put in. It's also kind of funny how Maya has to ride up and down the Nile in pursuit of her mission. She goes from Paramesses in the eastern Delta region to Aswan in the far south, back up to Memphis near where Cairo is, and back again, and the game skims over what amounts to thousands of kilometers of travel. For all that, though, it's obvious the developers went the full 18 qubits in doing their research. This map that's displayed during the travel cutscene makes pretty much perfect sense if you're acquainted with ancient Egypt's geography. You go to Memphis to meet Kamwaset, who is High Priest of Ptah, and Memphis was the worship center for Ptah. And you visit Aswan, where the obelisk is being quarried. They're using dolomite hammers to shape the obelisk out of granite. This is exactly where and how they did it. And I know that because I've been to Aswan, where you can see an unfinished obelisk still in the ground. The puzzles and gameplay pay homage to Egyptian mythology, folk magic, and medicine. For instance, the importance of the written word, purification.
Be purified through this offering.
Offerings, knowing someone's name.
Stay, Pamose. May the fire of the goddess Nekbet turn you to stone.
And dream interpretation. These are often inventory-based puzzles, finding objects and then finding a use for them. Others are logic puzzles that require finding what order to do things in, which tend to be my favorites. Maya can use amulets, incense, plants, spells.
O wax so pure, assume the shape of my words.
And clairvoyance. Some of the puzzles have a hint button in the corner you can click on, and most of the time if you equip the Eye of Horus amulet and click on something or someone, it'll provide a clue.
I see a donkey.
And Maya will let you know if you're on the wrong track.
This is useless.
One puzzle runs on a time limit after Maya gets bitten by a cobra and has to search the house of the currently absent healer Tuya for the antidote, with this representation of her health draining away. Things escalate to a pretty extreme degree as you start communing with actual Egyptian gods. This is, in my limited experience, something mortals hardly ever do in Egyptian mythology. It's more characteristic of Greek mythology.
I wouldn't have believed a mortal could ask the help of the gods, much less visit them.
Well, at least you're honest, which is more than I can say for most other mortals.
And it's a little jarring the way Maya remains formally polite and isn't freaking out about being in the literal presence of Ptah, Sekhmet, Isis, or Osiris. Because Maya is essentially a detective, talking to other characters for help and hints is a major part of the game as well. Kamwaset and the boatman who ferries you around mostly, but also the obelisk project heads and the deities, of course. After all the complaining I did about the stiff characters in Deep Space Nine Harbinger, it's nice to see a game that more or less threads the needle. The resolution is about as low, but the characters move in a more believable way, and even when they're idle or you can't interact with them at all, they still move around a little. I also appreciate the variety of skin tones of the characters in defiance of historical whitewashing of Egyptians. While the puzzles are pretty varied in themselves, their framing is weirdly monotonous. Overwhelmingly, the puzzles are presented as you having to prove yourself to whoever you're trying to get help from.
Prove to me by implementing the transfer spell.
But first, you must prove yourself worthy.
I shall only help you if you can prove yourself worthy.
I was surprised how a variety of puzzles all being framed the same way made them feel more like make-work than if they'd been justified by more diverse contexts. If you feel like going all the way back to watch my video considering Siberia 1, I talked about how a lot of adventure games have some weirdly mean-spirited puzzles, and this game has a couple. One of the prove-yourself puzzles is to cure this chap's sneezing. You do that by magically transferring the sneezing onto this donkey. Probably temporary, but still, poor donkey. Much like Siberia, I found one puzzle that was a complete wall for me, this lock tumbler puzzle. It's visually hard to parse due to the angle, and even after using the hints, I just gave up and followed the walkthrough. You can glean Microid's involvement in other ways. Apparently, they like the same batch of voice actors for the English versions of all their games. Kamwaset and seemingly most of the male characters are voiced by Alan Wenger, who voiced Hans Vorarlberg in Siberia 1 and 2.
I must honor Ptah, but a harmful presence is soiling the temple. I want to leave as quickly as possible, but it's Oscar who decides. He's the master of the train.
And Tuya and both goddesses you speak to are voiced by none other than Sharon Mann, Kate Walker herself.
I knew your father well. A great magician. You are humble and discreet.
But you have the air of a great officer.
Then comes the endgame. Spoilers beyond this point. It actually does represent a very effective combination of all the different types of puzzles up until that point. You use different spells and counterspells in a duel with the saboteur of the Obelisk project, followed by a board game style puzzle similar to the ones done for Isis and Osiris, and finally concoct a lure to entrap the power behind these attempts to overthrow Egypt once and for all. It's Set. The god Set, who murdered Osiris to try and seize the throne of Egypt. In other words, it's the most obvious answer you could have for a mystery based on Egyptian mythology. After that, you restore the health of the foreman, raise the obelisk on time, and live happily ever after. In my remarks on Riddle of the Sphinx, I said that I tend to assume adventure games are meant for kids just because I played so many of them when I was one. Fate of Ramses might actually be one that is meant for older kids or teens. It kind of goes over similar ground to Rick Riordan's excellent Kane Chronicles series, even. The puzzles are mostly relatively easy, and almost secondary to fitting as much authentic Egyptian history and mythology in as possible. It's tantamount to an edutainment game, considering that it includes a mini encyclopedia, and the developers had an Egyptologist consultant. So I certainly got a puzzle game set in ancient Egypt, but it strikes me that this is just a puzzle game. The story is boilerplate. In contrast to Siberia's Kate Walker, Maya doesn't have any character arc or deep relationships. Siberia created a resonant ambience of Eastern Europe that raised my curiosity without info dumping on me about it. Maybe if you were a kid learning about ancient Egypt for the first time, it would carry more impact, but even the subtextual world building of Jewels of the Oracle is more engaging. The setting still got me to buy it, so I suppose I can't call it ineffective. It does make for a short video, though. In any case, thank you for watching.